Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. And when it's all over, I can guarantee you'll be saying to yourself, I'm so glad I tuned in tonight. Well, thanks to you, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows. And thanks heaven they are, because you won't see much of what you're seeing tonight and on the other Indie Live shows on any of the major broadcasters. So let me remind you, you can watch the TNT show live on indielive.net. It's streamed out to YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. Plus, on YouTube, you can view all the previous 164 shows. That's right, we've done 164 shows. No mean feat. And we don't cost £300 million a year. No, if you're upset by media coverage of political events where journalism is often junked in favour of stenography or rehashed news releases, or worse, where conjecture and hearsay replace facts, well, if you're looking for an alternative voice, well, you found it. We're here for you. Please be here for us by supporting the Crowdfunder. It's a big deal. It guarantees that the shows like this can continue. We rely very much on your support. We cannot, like the BBC do, go dunning people on a poll tax and then squander the vast input that produces. Well, this has been another great week for British democracy. Keith Starmer and the Prime Minister wrapped themselves in the flag of St. George, stating that England uniquely had the values of respect and understanding of others. At the same time, the controversial Rwanda Act was passed to discourage migrants. Ironically, this would have meant the aforementioned St. George being promptly transported to Africa had he turned up on English shores. Incidentally, it's not well known, but amongst his other claims to fame, St. George is the patron saint of syphilitics. Tonight we'll be talking to two special guests, Leah Gunn Barrett and Henry Ferguson. We'll be discussing direct democracy, referenda, democratic deficits, and much else besides. And as ever on this show, they'll be taking your questions live. There's still time to put a question. You'll see the details on the screen. Now, as you know, TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So in some respects, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now to our guests tonight, Leah and Henry. Thanks for joining us both. How are you? First, Leah.
Hi, John. I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. How are you, Henry?
I'm doing fine. Pleased to be here. Thank you, John.
Good, good. Now we're going to talk about direct democracy tonight. Now, a lot of people watching and listening might not be terribly familiar with what that concept is. Leah, maybe you could kick off by telling us what direct democracy means to you.
Well, I've been learning about it really from Henry. He and I have been working together for a few months. He lives in Switzerland where they actually have that system. And it's really just about making sure that people have a voice, but more than that the people actually are in charge. So I think of it in sort of graphic terms like a pyramid, the normal pyramid that you or I might be familiar with, government at the top, people at the bottom. Well, direct democracy inverts the pyramid and puts the people at the top, because the government is accountable to the people. And you have a constitution that ensures that that's the case, and you have mechanisms for the people to actually exercise their power through political rights, referendums and initiatives. For example, they write the constitutions in Switzerland, and they should write it here in Scotland, in an independent Scotland, not the politicians, in my view. So it's really about giving people control. So like if there's a piece of bad legislation, Henry and I were at Holyrood just yesterday for the debate on the Victims, Witnesses, Justice Reform Bill, known as the Juryless Trial Bill. And that is a piece of bad law. It's in stage one. And in Switzerland, if you had a case of a bad law like that coming forward that most people probably would not support, first of all, the government probably wouldn't bring it forward because they knew it would trigger a referendum, and they want to avoid that at all costs. But a referendum can stop bad legislation in its tracks.
Why is the legislation bad, Leah?
Oh, well, first of all, it's trying to do too many things. Henry can chime in on this any minute, but it puts about 6 different things together into one bill. But there were 2 aspects that we were particularly focused on, which were changes to the Scottish Constitution, doing away with juries for rape trials. They called it a pilot. And the other is doing away with a uniquely Scottish not proven verdict and just have an English system of guilty and not guilty. And we were in the peanut gallery, public gallery, couldn't talk, couldn't drink water, couldn't read. We were being told off by guards up there. It was like being back at school or something. You felt like you had to be on your best behavior. You couldn't speak, you could barely, exhale loudly. It was like you're in some kind of political church. So, and it was all very, to me, evocative of a Westminster setting, except you didn't have the green benches in opposition to each other. The design of Holyrood is more consensual. It's a half circle, but everything else just smacked of parliamentary sovereignty. The speeches were boring. A lot of people read them. Angela Constance and her purple hair. And, you had a Church of Scotland person, a woman reading some kind of a prayer or thought for the day at the very beginning. It was interesting, but it impressed upon me that we are really dealing with a political culture that has become acclimated to parliamentary sovereignty. And Scotland, of course, is supposed to be principled on the people, popular sovereignty, not parliamentary sovereignty. So there's a lot of work to be done to sort of change the mindset and get people to start realizing that they actually do have the power.
It's a good point you make there. We interviewed Stephen Flynn, who's the SNP's leader at Westminster. And I asked him the question. I said, where does sovereignty lie? Does it lie with the people? And he said, well, it depends. And you could dig this out from the interview. And he said, right now, Westminster, it's here. It's parliamentary sovereignty. So there is I got a sense that they have become acclimated to operating within an odd system, because effectively we have 2 issues here about sovereignty. There's a widely held and growing belief, I suspect, in Scotland that the people are sovereign. But the system in which the Scottish Parliament operates denies that by accepting that Westminster is sovereign. Now, there can't be 2 sovereignties.
No.
Sovereign means there's one in charge. So we seem to live in this sort of odd world where it's like Schrodinger's cat. It depends if you're watching it or not, whether you're sovereign or not. A very odd situation. Sorry, if I can come to you, please, Henry. Leah mentioned approvingly the system that operates in Switzerland. And give us an example or 2 of how the Swiss system of direct democracy is better than the arrangements that we have at Holyrood and Westminster.
Well, I'll start. Let me start off by saying 4 times a year, I get a big, thick envelope through my letterbox, and that's my voting materials for, you name it, any subject under the sun. And the subjects are very laid out in a very detailed manner. And there are 3 levels of government in that envelope. You've got the federal level, the national level. You've got the communal level, and you've got the regional level, the so-called cantonal level. And we're voting. Every voter, registered voter, is voting 4 times a year, and we're voting on all kinds of subjects. It's a little bit of a time-consuming process, but voting for me 4 times a year, that takes, I don't know, a couple of hours maybe. You have to read the materials. Their materials are very detailed. They're prepared by the government, but you don't have to do much work to exercise your right to vote. And it's a postal vote. You stick the little pieces of paper back in the envelope and you mail your envelope. And then 4 days a year, you have a national vote on just any kind of subject. It's a wonderful system.
Let's deal with the technicality, if we may. Are you a Swiss citizen?
Yes, I've been a Swiss citizen for about 25 years now. My wife was Swiss. My children are Swiss. They live in Switzerland.
Now, would anyone who's not Swiss be able to vote in the same way that you are?
Look, Switzerland, as you know, is a confederation. So you've got 26 cantons, and each canton has its own cantonal legislation on eligibility to vote. So in some cantons, the eligibility depends on your nationality. So in some, it's a manner of integrating foreigners, but at the communal level, at the township level, they tend to give the vote to the widest possible community, including foreigners. At the cantonal level, some cantons give foreigners full voting rights, others don't. And at the federal level, it's only Swiss.
Okay. Well, that sort of makes sense, because I assume at federal level, you were talking about changes to the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I've been voting federally since 1998, I think. And since 1998.
Yeah, it would be a big ask to say to somebody who is just passing through for a year or two, you can amend the Constitution, which is a permanent change. I mean, that affects all the citizens. So it's understandable that
Absolutely.
Constitution. Yeah.
Yep.
But equally, it's understandable that if you're talking about the locality, then why not give people the opportunity to say their pieces, as it were.
But just to expand a little bit on what I was saying there, politics are just a fact of daily life in this part of the world, because we control the Constitution, and if we want to change the Constitution, we change it. And the politicians, the Parliament, they just have to go along with it. So as Leah says, it's upside down in a sense, because we control and change the Constitution, and the politicians just have to implement it. Sometimes it takes 1, 2, or 3 years for the laws to be changed, but the new Constitution comes into effect the day after the vote.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, my word. And not quite how it happens in the US, is it, Leah?
No, heavens no. Changing the Constitution, you need 2/3 of all states, and that's why we have so few amendments to the Constitution. Yeah, it's an uphill process.
Our Constitution is unbelievably dynamic.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And because of the process I'm just talking about, the population, and I think I include foreigners in that, but the Swiss nationals are very, very politically literate.
Well, that's certainly another big difference between the UK in all its forms and Switzerland. I mean, there can be few, I suspect, less knowledgeable constituencies, national constituencies, that are as ill-informed as the UK. Now, partly that's down to the awfulness of the media, but not solely. I think the school system is an area which probably needs improvement here, but because you would expect people who go to school to learn about the way that their country is constituted, even if they learn not much else besides.
Yep.
But there's no evidence of that, particularly in the UK. I mean, politicians regularly come on television and radio and make the most extraordinary statements, which they claim are constitutional. Now, this is in a state which has no written constitution. On what basis can you say something is constitutional if you don't have the basic document? Anyway, it doesn't prevent them from making these extraordinary statements. But I was just thinking too, Leah, in the United States, of course, when you're talking about electing presidents, you have an electoral college.
Yeah.
Which I gather was put in place because the politicians way back then, the founding fathers, didn't altogether trust the great
unwashed public. No, they still really don't.
And they decided that in the light of that mistrust, that they ought to put in some extra layer.
And that's why you have the anomaly. It's basically a first past the post system for presidential elections, which is why you can win the popular vote but lose the presidency, as happened a few times in recent history.
Is that right? Who lost recently?
Well, Hillary Clinton was one example. She got more votes than Trump in 2016. And also George Bush II, as I call him, Shrub, more commonly known. I think when he faced off against Al Gore actually had more of the popular vote than Shrub did. But because Shrub's brother Jeb was governor of Florida, he managed to swing Florida into Bush's column, into his brother's column.
Yeah. Well, that's again these things politicians do.
It's not democratic to have a first past the post system. And of course, that whole UK is predicated on that. And there's one other country, I think it's Belarus, that has first past the post. So that's how undemocratic the UK is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely undemocratic, but it's ironically, it's immensely proud of that.
I don't know why.
Well, if you scratch any politician at Westminster, obviously I'm not including the SNP and Alba contingent and perhaps Plaid Cymru and maybe the Soul Green, but by and large, they're immensely proud of it. The fact that it's odd, it seems to augment its attractiveness. And the fact that it's wholly undemocratic, I mean, they've had so many chances to change the system. And they, each and every time they decline to do so. I mean, the Labour Party, for example, has been saying for well over a century that they plan to abolish the House of Lords. The reality is that they appoint people to it. And you think, well, I'm not quite sure when you plan to abolish it if you're busy appointing people to it. It's facile, really.
It's an anachronism. It really is. Yeah.
Henry, I want to take a question that we've gotten, which I think is really interesting. The question is this: is there any friction between cantons and districts when they vote on federal issues? Obviously, they don't vote on constitutional issues, but it's a good point. Actually, is there any friction between the different levels, cantons, districts, and the federal grouping when a constitutional matter is being discussed?
There is friction, but because of the way Switzerland's organized, if you read the constitution, the people are sovereign. So the people are not named as sovereign in the constitution. It's the cantons that are named as sovereign.
Really?
So the power is decentralized.
Okay.
There's no central power in Parliament.
Help us understand that, Henry. How do decisions get taken then? Because the people who favour the first past the post system persistently and consistently say things like, you get strong government because one party comes out on top and they don't have to worry about all this opposition and making deals and all this. And you get strong leadership. Now, we've seen the evidence of strong leadership over the last century.
You have to understand that Switzerland's built on consensus. So the body of law, if you like, at the moment has been building and building since the modern constitution was put in place in 1848. So the constitution is pretty detailed, but the people have always had control over that constitution. So when the people vote in these 4 times a year elections, well, I shouldn't say elections actually, because they're voting on things rather than electing people. But when the people vote, they're voting on things, they're voting on issues, and
help us understand that, Henry. What was the last vote where you cast a vote on one of these?
Last month, Leah was visiting me in Switzerland.
It's in March 3rd, wasn't it, Henry?
Yeah, March 3rd.
And what was the question that was being put?
It was.
It was adding a 13th month to the state pension, right. And also raising the pension age at which you retire, and you can tell about the results.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Leah.
Sorry, what was the 13th month for? Sorry.
About 4 years ago, there was a vote to try and recognise that pensions were too low.
Yeah.
And that didn't make it.
Okay.
But this time, the same subject came back in the March vote, and this time the people voted the government didn't make a recommendation, which it usually does, but the government didn't make a recommendation because it thought it wasn't a sure thing. But nevertheless, the people second guessed the government and voted a 13th month pension for old age pensioners. So the government.
So that meant they got paid 13 times a year. Is that right?
Yeah. In December we'll get 2 starting next year. I'll get paid 13 monthly pension payments.
Good for you.
And interestingly enough, there's another vote coming in June. It slipped my mind at the moment, but there's another vote coming in the same line of thought, and it's the same. The political promoters are the same, and it looks like that's going to pass as well. And the government is being put in its place.
So what that means now is that the government has to go off and find the money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the people have spoken.
Right. The people have spoken.
What they've said is that you, the government, had no view on this, but we certainly have a view on it. And our view is that there ought to be a 13th month. Okay.
People have told the parliamentarians, do it.
Do it. Yeah.
And they have to do it.
Yeah. It's fascinating because on the one hand, you say that the cantons are sovereign, but the reality seems to be that in actual fact, the people are sovereign.
Well, it's funny.
Not because the cantons are the people.
Well, it's funny you should say that because when the politicians, and I'm talking about every politician, including the president, when the politicians talk about the people, they say the sovereign. Okay? So in the Constitution, the people are not mentioned as sovereign, actually, because the Constitution only in about 5-6 articles, the Constitution gives the people all the power. So the people have the power to argue against or contest any law proposed by Parliament, and that's a referendum. We can oppose pretty well every law, and the people also have the power to do what are called initiatives, which is change the Constitution. That works well. But
What do you say, Henry? People might say, well, you say it works well, Henry, and that's great for you because you got an extra pension payment, and we understand that worked for you. However, some people might, used to the first past the post, parliamentary sovereignty, all of that stuff, might say, but hold on a second, surely this produces chaos. And that, you know, that there's a vote in March that says this is what we're going to do, and then there's another vote in June in which it gets overturned. So surely this just leads to a load of extra cost and bureaucracy.
Look, it's not cheap. There's no question about it. Costs money. But it's a fantastic way of building national consensus. If you look at the OECD annual report of the OECD on trust of people in their government, I think Britain's down at about 30th place or something, maybe even lower. And Switzerland comes out every year. Switzerland's top of the list because the people trust their government.
Yeah.
And the government, interestingly enough, and probably very unlike the UK, the government, the 7-member government, these are top politicians, and they practically never get fired. There's only been 4 politicians fired since 1848. You believe that?
So I find that extraordinary.
What we do,
I always thought it was an occupational hazard for politicians to get fired.
Listen to me. What we do is we don't change governments. We don't change the composition of government. We change the constitution. And that acts as an absolutely fantastic safety valve in terms of social tension and so on. So
So you leave these 7 people. Are they men and women, or are these all guys?
Up till a couple of years ago, it was a majority of women.
Oh,
right
really?
now, I think we've got 3 women and 4 men.
Okay.
But these are because of the Constitution, and it's the people who have said that dictated the size of the Constitution. It's only 7 people. The government want to increase it to 9. They've been trying for years and years and years to increase the number of federal ministers, and the people won't let them do it. So it's seven politicians.
I love it.
By necessity, it is a coalition.
Yeah.
We've got 4 parties in government, and these are each political party picks its best candidate for government.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastic system.
And also, you have no prima donnas developing like you do here. There's no
exactly
for prime minister, because they have this, it's like musical chairs rotation every year. So can you name who your current president is, Henry?
Yes, Viola Amert.
Okay.
We've got a lady at the moment. She's from my canton.
What's her name?
She's a local lady. I don't know her personally, but
you mentioned her name. What's her name, Henry?
Viola Amherd.
Viola Amherd.
Amherdt.
Yeah. Doesn't sound as if she comes from the French part of.
No, she comes from the German. She comes from the German part.
Yeah,
but she's obviously bilingual. Huh?
So this is another interesting factor. The UK is always telling us that, well, we can't have all these different languages, we can't have all this diversity because it's expensive. And here you've got a situation where you've got how many languages, official languages?
Well, there's 3. There's French, German, Italian, and Romansh.
Yeah, we've got 4.
You've got 4. And everybody seems to be able to cope with that.
Well, the political rule of the game is everybody speaks his own language. So they stand up in Parliament and speak their own language. I'm not too sure. I don't think they have translation services, but that's the way it is. It's just a fact of life.
Okay, absolutely fascinating. I mean, we could go on for hours on this, I'm sure, because it's just so different to the Westminster stroke Holyrood system with all of its issues about
John,
democratic
if
deficits.
I
Henry,
can,
you should mention the double majority and how that works and how that protects minorities in Switzerland and how it would help Scotland.
yeah,
How that works.
you've got the 51%, 49% model of majorities. You can only apply that to a national vote. You can go to 2/3, which is for some things at least 2/3 is looked on as being the good model. But the model that exists in Switzerland is what Leah's just said, the double majority, which means a majority of the people on a national basis and the majority of a people on a regional basis.
Oh.
And to change the constitution, you have to have what's called a double majority, which is a majority of the people nationally and a majority of the people regionally.
So let me get this right then. Had that been applied to the UK, then Brexit could not have happened.
Exactly. Northern Ireland and Scotland would have stopped it.
You wouldn't have had Brexit.
What's fascinating to me is that I think it was Alex Salmond who was around at that time in Westminster. I may be mistaken, it may have been some other MP, who actually asked the government of the day for a commitment that that would be the case. Even though constitutionally, the government decides everything if it has a majority in the UK, effectively rewrites the constitution every time if it wishes.
Nicola Sturgeon raised the same thing at some point or other. I can't remember when.
And an assurance was given that there would be that Brexit would not go ahead unless the whole country and its various parts voted for it, and that commitment was then reneged on.
Yeah, I mean, in Scotland, you're on a loser because you're always going to get outvoted by England.
Can we move to you, Leah? Thanks for that, Henry. That was very, very helpful. I'm going to come back if we've got time to talk about some of the intricacies here, if we can. Leah, I mentioned at the beginning the whole issue about democratic deficits. In your view, looking at the arrangements in Scotland and maybe broader at Westminster, what do you feel is the biggest issue there, or are there a series of issues where the democratic deficit comes into play?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you just look at the whole UK, certainly it comes into play big time with PR, or lack of PR, I should say, first past the post. And Scotland hasn't elected a Tory government since, 1955 or something like that. And our MPs are obviously outnumbered 10-1 in Westminster. So, why are we there? That's one issue, is the voting system. And in Scotland, we do have a form of PR, certainly for Holyrood, which people should be educated about and how that works. But there's another deficit, which is, I think, both Scotland and Westminster are overly centralized. Yeah. And I think when you have, and there's a lot of resentment here in Scotland that I've come to understand and see. For example, the Central Belt gets all the attention, and the borders, Dumfries and Galloway, the Highlands, the Islands, Orkney, Shetland, you name it, they feel rather left out. And if we had a system where you decentralize power to the regions, I was just doing some reading earlier today that, there was a Local Government Scotland Act 1973 that divided Scotland into 9 two-tier regions and 3 island areas, unitary island areas. And, we could have a cantonal or regional system in an independent Scotland where each region would have its own constitution and they could write it. And there's a principle in direct democracy that anything that can be done at the lower level should be done there. It shouldn't have to be done by the top government. So, for example, you have your police, you have education, health, electricity, water. Those things are regional responsibilities. And the federal government, if you want to call it that, of course, looks after things like the national military, foreign affairs, infrastructure, national rail system, things like that. Yeah. And that gives people a voice. They feel like they have some ownership of their government, which they do. And the other unique thing about Switzerland, I was floored when Henry told me this, is that more than half the taxes are raised at the local and regional level. They have tax raising powers.
And does that also mean spending as well? Or do they have to return some of that to the centre?
Yeah, sure.
So if you raise it, you can spend it locally.
Absolutely. The communal level or municipal level and the cantonal level, they have to balance their budgets.
Okay.
Over a pretty short-term period, let's say 3 years, they have to balance their budgets. And within that, they have their constitutionally assigned responsibilities. Well, I better be careful what I say. The central government has its constitutionally defined responsibilities.
Yeah.
And the federal government can't do anything that's not spelled out in the Constitution. So the people have told government, you can do this. And at the other end, the real decision, the first political decision is at the communal and municipal level, where they have the first crack at deciding what they want to do. And they do it, and you do things like primary schools and garbage collection and usual stuff. And at the next level, or the middle level, the regional level, the Constitution says they are sovereign. So that means all the residual power in deciding what to do is at that middle level. And the Constitution says the cantons or the regions are sovereign.
So if a particular canton is less wealthy than its neighbour, it has to cut its cloth to suit its income. Okay. That doesn't lead, for example, people to say, oh, why doesn't central government bail us out? Because we don't have all these wealthy foreigners in our canton.
Well, I don't know what the English word is for it. There's an annual conference between the cantons. It's called the financial perequation. So the daily life goes on, and then once a year, there are some cantons that are chronically deficit, and some others which are so-called rich cantons. I think there's only 6 rich cantons, of which Geneva, interestingly, is one. Where I live now, we're a poor canton, so we're a deficit canton. And at the end of the year, it takes them a few weeks to sort it all out. But at the end of the year, the rich cantons make payment to the deficit cantons.
Yeah. It seems to me if you're part of the same state, then there's an obligation, as there would be with individials, to help each other and families.
It's a fascinating system.
One of the questions we've had is, is Switzerland as badly affected, I use these words advisedly, with the professional political class as the UK is? Where people who have very little perhaps experience of other parts of life become politicians right from the get-go. They're assistants to other politicians. They have all these different roles, but they're all within the political system, and they graduate up through that system without necessarily having much exposure to outside areas, except through consultancies and other lobby groups, for example. Does that apply just as much, do you think, in Switzerland as it does elsewhere?
No.
The
politicians, first reaction to your question, the politicians are part-timers. They're not fully paid 24-hour-a-day politicians. So you tend to find quite a lot of lawyers in there, and quite a lot of independent businessmen and women. But you've got 3 levels of parliament. You've got real parliaments or local assemblies at each level. and they've got they run their village or their town in accordance with their constitutionally assigned duties or functions, and yeah.
So, for example, do these cantons have borrowing powers? I think you said they did.
Sorry, what?
Do they have borrowing powers?
Absolutely, absolutely. The communes have borrowing power.
Oh my!
Why not?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I have to say, I laud it. I applaud it. I just that coming from this system where everyone is sort of centralized, if not grossly over centralized.
Yeah.
And one of the tools that's used to enforce centralization is to say, well, you can make as many decisions as you like, but you're getting no money from me to do so. Being the central power.
You've got full tax raising powers at each one of the three levels.
Okay.
Direct taxation, and the middle level is the level which assesses the taxpayer and says the taxable income and the taxable capital or fortune, if we call it, and that middle level fixes the tax parameters, and the federal level, the national level, and the village or town level accept the figures from the middle level.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Everyone, the local parliaments at each one of the three levels fix the tax rates.
It just sounds fantastic compared to what we're used to.
And then that you have accountability then, because you know who's taxing you, and
absolutely
that is so important.
One of the things I used to like when I lived in the States was that there was an election every once in a while for the local dog catcher as well as the sheriff. And I always thought
I used to have a house on Cape Cod, and I was telling Henry that the town governance in New England is famous because you have town hall meetings, and even as a summer resident, we were invited to town hall meetings, even though we weren't there year round, to take part, and we could, voice our concerns. We couldn't actually vote for the representatives, the councilors, but and the town was so well run, and this is a feature of New England. So it shows you when you decentralize authority, it really does work.
What do you think?
Be trusted.
Let's extend that a little bit further, Leah. And by all means, chip in, Henry. If you were to make a proposal to the Scottish Parliament, about decentralisation, well, first of all, I say good luck with it. But let's assume that you've got a willing audience. What sort of recommendations would you make right now to make things better?
Well, I would reconstitute, some regions in Scotland and give them power to govern themselves. I think that would really do a tremendous amount at empowering, making people feel like getting rid of their apathy, like the government, is my government and I will have an impact on it. And it's accountable to me. There's someone I can contact. There's someone who will listen to me. And decentralize, just not regionally, but down to that local level, the borough, if you like, the boroughs. How many boroughs do we used to have in Scotland? Over 200 or something? I don't know the number. So why, we need to get back to a system of decentralization, which is why Henry calls it the triple D, decentralized direct democracy, because otherwise, decentralization is built into it, but you sometimes just have to spell it out, especially in a place like the UK, which is so overly centralized. So that would be the first thing I would do is return power to the people. I think it was a mistake when they created Police Scotland, for example, centralizing it. They lost contact with local communities. It's you can see how badly things have worked out. So go back to when it worked better. Why not? And we have plenty of examples of countries like Switzerland and many others around the world that work really well with decentralized forms of government.
Yeah,
John, if I could chip in with it, I'm sure you remember the example of the water privatization, which Westminster wanted to force on Scotland, and Strathclyde, as it then was, the middle level of government organised a referendum, So from the direct democracy point of view, it wasn't perfect because it should have direct democracy gives that authority to call out or organize itself for a referendum to the bottom level, the people.
Yeah.
But anyway, it happened, and that was the cooperation between the bottom level and the middle level against the central level.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely essential if you want to have a really functioning direct democracy. You need.
That was 1994, and that's why our water here is so superior. It's not full of what.
Absolutely.
Well, you can't bathe in the rivers in England and Wales.
Horrible.
You can't.
I mean, the results are right there. Look at the mess England's in.
Yeah, so it's just a mess. I mean,
and the thing is that 97.2% of the people in that referendum voted to keep Scotland's water public.
Yeah.
So Westminster couldn't ignore that. But you know what they did do? In 1996, they abolished Strathclyde Regional Council.
Yeah. No, you have to say, I always thought Strathclyde was overly large. I mean, it worked very well in that particular instance, but it was a step in the wrong direction. I mean, we're talking about the huge advantages of decentralization. It struck me that Strathclyde took us in a very different direction in that particular case. But I wanted to ask you a question. We've had does the media have the same pernicious influence in Switzerland as it does in Scotland?
I would say definitely not. There's absolutely no comparison between the BBC and Swiss television. There's no political interference in Swiss television at all. The press is very regionalized. We've got a couple of big ones, one big Swiss German one big French Swiss one. And
sorry to interrupt. So how is the national, the equivalent of the BBC, how is it, what's its reporting line? It must report to the people somehow. How does it do that? Does it or no?
They operate under a concession. I'm trying to think of a UK equivalent.
Channel 4?
Yeah, they operate under a concession whereby there is a board which is politically appointed.
Okay.
The funding comes in part from the Federation, but we do pay a license fee.
You do.
Every man and his dog pays a license fee.
Okay, so it's a poll
tax.
There
is currently the far right political parties saying that the license fee is too much, and they want to cut it in half. So we're probably going to have to vote on that next year, and there'll probably be a compromise.
I'd love it if the Scots had a chance to vote on BBC Scotland.
Wouldn't that be great?
I'd love that.
My God, I would love that too.
That's just part of direct democracy.
But again, the whole broadcasting arrangement in the UK is symptomatic of the same centralization fetish.
Absolutely.
This huge obsession that everything has to be run from one place, and where, I mean, it produces so many ill effects. The one that you notice in broadcasting, at least I do all the time, is that the broadcasters, all of them, tend to consist of a small coterie of people who all know each other, who are all, in some cases, actually
rather incestuous. Yeah,
they're actually related to each other. I.e., there are people running separate news channels who sleep together at night time. One is a politician, and one is his wife. She runs the BBC News, I think, is run on that basis. And you think, how can it be impartial? There's no way that could be deemed to be free of political influence.
It's the British establishment. Come on.
Oh yeah. Well, there we are again. But then again, nobody seems to find this odd. I mean, it's like the Westminster sovereignty thing. Nobody finds it odd, even though the whole world looking at it says, "This is weird, guys. You need to go off into a darkened room and come back out once you've sorted yourself out, because it's so weird. I mean, listening to the two of you just now, it throws that into the sharpest relief.
John,
I mean, the contrast.
Can I interrupt you just on one thing? I was asked, or I've been asked several times, do you receive impartial information before you vote?
That was going to be my next question.
Okay. Well, we vote, as I said earlier, 4 times a year. And yeah, you've got loads of debates on TV and in the newspapers and so on, but they've all got their one way or another a political leaning. And the last time Leah came and visited me in Switzerland, I kept my voting envelope closed deliberately so that I would open it with her, or I let her, she opened it herself. And there were all the voting materials for the 3 levels of government.
They were all color coded. It was great.
In the one envelope. And yeah, it was all there. Well, the point I was going to make is that in the envelope are 3 explanatory brochures or little booklets which provide the government point of view, the opposition point of view. We're talking about a referendum or an initiative. It presents in a very impartial way the issues. Okay. And for some issues, there will be a recommendation of government as to how to vote. On other issues, there will be a recommendation of all the political parties, each political party saying, we recommend you do this, that, or the next thing. And it's all in one envelope. You don't have to watch the news on television. You don't have to read the newspapers. You've got it all in one envelope. And as I say, it takes me about 2 hours, generally speaking, to inform myself completely, impartially, and I vote, and I put the little things back in the envelope, and I put it in the letterbox. And
Can you vote? Is it possible to vote electronically?
No. They've tried it, but they've found too many technical problems, and no, we're still paper based.
Okay.
But you're only 8.7 million people. That's eminently doable. Scotland's even smaller, and I think people trust intuitively paper over electronic voting anyway. I do.
They do right now. Yeah. I mean, there's a problem in Scotland. Previous interviewees have told us, which in terms of young people, because they move house, they get deregistered. And they don't notice it because it's not a top priority for them. And then all of a sudden an election comes along and it's terribly important. And then they find out they don't have a vote. It's just that, and again, it's probably a result of this centralization fetish that goes on in the UK. This has been absolutely fascinating, and we don't have much time left. But I need to ask you a question, Leah, which came in. Somebody's asking, is it possible that you could envisage California / Texas breaking away from the United States?
Did they see the recent Alex Garland Civil War film? I bet they did. I did as well. It was really bloody, wasn't it? It's possible. Sure. I think so. We had one civil war. I think the border issue with Mexico is a huge issue in the United States right now. I mean, this packaged bill that passed Congress just recently, giving all this military aid money to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, also had in it the TikTok ban, but it didn't have any money for protecting the border, which is what the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, said it must have in order for him to support it. Of course, then he flipped after having a little meeting with the CIA. They flipped him for some reason. But the border is a huge issue because people are coming across, streaming across without any kind of checks, and they're ending up in cities like New York, in California, Texas, and those states are having to take care of them and pay for them. And some people think the Democratic Party is actually deliberately doing this, Biden is, to send these migrants to states like Tennessee, swing states, so that when the presidential election comes and they're allowed to vote, and many of them are given the right to vote, even though they're not citizens, it will swing the election for the Democrats in November, that's a theory. I can't confirm it. That's what people are saying.
That sounds like a stretch to me. My experience is that people aren't as malleable as that. I mean, I know
the Texas Attorney General is taking the federal government to court over this. So it's serious. I mean, it really is serious, because Texas and California are suffering in particular from this. But then New York State is too. And the governor of New York, a woman named by the name of Kathy Hochul, I don't think she's great or anything, but she there's no money for New York City, no state money for the mayor of New York to house these migrants. He doesn't know where he's going to put them. They're in schools right now. They're kicking kids out of schools, putting migrants in schools, and kids are remote learning, which is terrible for their education.
I mean, but there's nothing new there. I mean, you can go back to Tammany Hall when people came off the boats and they were told, "Hey, we can get you a place to live. All you have to do is put this X on a piece of paper once in a while. No big deal."
Maybe so, but there are literally thousands and thousands of people coming, and there's no vetting. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, I wasn't seeking to minimize the issue. I just wanted to say that there's. Yeah. I mean, all countries have this sort of backstory of the way people vote and how they're encouraged to vote. I mean, the UK had its rotten boroughs for all these decades and decades. And these people had seats in the House of Commons and made laws, on the basis of what? They bought their way in, it's
sure. There's always been corruption.
Yeah.
But so it's entirely possible, in answer to that question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be good. I think maybe it'd be good if the United States were broken up into smaller pieces. Maybe we'd function better.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's an argument that says maybe the European Union ought to have around about 50 states or 40 states, and maybe that would be better for them. I don't know. Maybe if they have the Swiss system, it might work better.
I'll tell you one thing Americans are getting fed up with: is sending money abroad when there's so many problems at home that need to be fixed. Sending billions to Ukraine and Israel. The Israelis have a higher standard of living than most Americans. They have healthcare. They have a lot of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of growing anger in the States right now.
Yeah. I've seen it on some of the. I mean, in addition to the unwelcome emails I get from Donald Trump and his various relatives, I do get real information about the US, and it is scary. But then again, if you look back through history, it's one of the outcomes of running an empire. You do always end up as, if you're the world's police person, you end up in that situation where everyone looks to you for bailing them out and trying to keep the warring factions across the place in order. It is very difficult, but it's just one of these things. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there any closing remarks that Henry you would like to make, and Leah perhaps?
I think my closing remark would be to repeat that decentralization message. Mm-hmm. It's so important, and you can move mountains with the people and the regions together. And neither of them can do it on their own. I think they need to work together, and so decentralization for me is the big one.
Great, super, thanks, Leah.
And I would just say, trust the people, and the people need to trust themselves. Yeah. We need to have the confidence to know that we can govern ourselves and do it extremely well. And of course we can. Scotland is full of brilliant people. I've met so many of them, and they need to have that self-confidence, and just to tell the politicians that they're actually in charge. The people and the politicians have to take orders from them for a change. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, wouldn't that be good? I hear your point about self-confidence. Super. Thank you very much. I'm just going to make a few concluding remarks. If you can stick around, please, for a few seconds afterwards, I'd appreciate it. Well, there you are, folks. A big thanks to Leah and Henry, and thanks to you for joining us. Look out for next week's show, please, where we have a very interesting speaker. We've got Tony Cox from All Under One Banner, so look out for Tony. Again, a big thank you to Leah and Henry. I'm afraid we probably only scratched the surface here, but if you're interested, I'm sure if you contact Leah and Henry, they can give you more information. And remember too, the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. To all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care, and please remember the crowdfunder. Good night all.